Hey Dreamers, I hope everyone had a great week, with an even better weekend ahead. So July is now over, and we are getting closer to the end of the summer, which is really sad, because I really enjoy this summer. Couple quick things I want to share. The financial report for July will be available in about a week or so. You can check those out, as well as the current download stats for the show at howtodream.co/income. Tomorrow, Saturday, August 2nd at 7 p.m., I will be live streaming video from Adventuratorium Live. I invite you all to check out Adventuratorium.com, download for free, or stream for free, as well as donate to Give Kids the World, and even buy t-shirts and buy a limited edition dual CD set of Adventuratorium. I will be performing a live version of my DJ mix inspired by Pixar's Up with Disney music mashups done live on 2 turntables. Again, tomorrow night, August 2nd, 7 p.m., there will be a live video feed of me performing Adventuratorium. You can check it out at adventuratorium.com. Check the show notes for a link. I hope everyone has a magical weekend. Take care.
And of course, I'm here with Joe on his show, and thank you for inviting me. This was really nice of you to let me talk for way too long. You are going to edit this, right? Like with a hacksaw and a chisel and get it down to 3 or 4 hours. Is that the plan now? Oh, I apologize to all you people. Okay, just you got things to do, right? Laundry, cooking, just make the bed. I owe you all an hour and a half of your lives. I'm really sorry.
This is the Dreamers Podcast, where dreamers share their stories to inspire you. Now, join host Joe Pardo as he interviews a dreamer who's living their dreams.
Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pardo, and today I am interviewing Jim Hill, who is living his dream through writing about theme parks and animation. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hey, Joe. How you doing?
Doing wonderful. How about yourself?
Just provided the house isn't struck by lightning and I don't die in a horrible flood, I'm good.
Yeah.
As Joe and I are recording this, there is this giant storm covering the eastern seaboard. In fact, if we're lucky, we'll hear thunder in the background with you, right?
Yes.
So I'm at least on higher ground. So, and you're in the basement. You could be the first to go, Joe.
I could be.
Okay.
Jersey is supposed to fall off into the water at some point, isn't it?
Oh, be nice to Jersey. Nancy has family down there, and whenever we go back and forth to Florida, we're always driving through Jersey, and I love the names there: Hoboken, Secaucus, Weehawken, and just when you live up where I live, where everything's a borough, it's a Boxborough, Northborough, Southborough, Middleborough. It's like you guys couldn't come up with any names. We look in Jersey, and it's just like, Secaucus. I mean, there's a name. So.
It's funny you say that. I actually live in a Clarksboro, next to a Paulsboro, next to a Swedesboro, next to a Gibbsboro.
You got to wonder, did they get like a break? Just sort of like, we've got these 5 letters left over. All I got to do is put something in front of it, So.
Well, let's get started by giving some background about yourself.
Well, this is going to be boring. I'm a fat guy, lives in New Hampshire, kind of backed into writing about Disney. Basically, I was in the military. I was a Disney dweeb from way back. I mean, again, not to date myself, but as a 55-year-old, I remember when there were only 3 channels, and one of them was NBC, and on Sunday night, that was when you sat down at 7:30 or thereabouts and watched kindly old Uncle Walt, who introduced The Wonderful World of Color. And every so often, he'd do a show about the theme parks or Imagineering or animation. More often than not, it was a big dog that was lost in the forest and somehow made its way home. But every so often, there'd be these great Imagineering-based shows or great animation shows. And that just fascinated me. So I began chasing Disney information about the Disney company at an early age. In fact, I remember must have been 71, 72. The very first Disney history books were Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, which is really kind of a nasty book. It was clear, even as a 10, 11, 12-year-old reading the thing, Richard didn't really like the Walt Disney Company and, just wrote in the most negative possible terms. Where the other book was actually the Disney films. It was Leonard Maltin. God, I remember it was about 10 or 15 years ago. Leonard was hosting a talk at the Philadelphia Film Festival. He was actually interviewing Roy Disney at Roy E. Disney, talking about his career. And at the end of the presentation, the entire Disneyana community lines up to get autographs with Roy or get their picture taken and that sort of thing. And I'm the one slob going over to Leonard, sitting there by the piano alone. I bring out my moth-eared, beaten up, it's like, I have the first edition of this book. I read this, and it's like she's like, this is cool. Just everybody else has the paperbacks, and I had the hardback from way back. But again, that's what you had to do back then. I mean, in this pre-internet phase, these things called books and magazines and newspapers that you actually had to read and chase down the info. And then from there, jump ahead to the early 80s. I end up in the military. I'm a journalist, because the nice thing about journalists is they don't send you places where things blow up. You go there after they've blown up and, oh my God, it blew up, but if you're lucky, you're not there when they're actually shooting at you. So spent 4 years in the Army. And while I was there, a friend I'd gone to the Defense Information College with ended up on the West Coast at, I want to say, 29 Palms, which is a military base on the West Coast. And this is 83, and Donald Duck had just turned 50. And the commander of 29 Palms was this complete publicity hog. He loved seeing his face in the paper. He loved, he wanted pictures. He wanted stories about himself. And he shows up one day at the PR office and is like, Donald Duck is 50 years old. And everyone kind of blinks at him and goes, okay. And didn't he make cartoons during World War II? And my friend Marjorie Ebert, who worked at the office, said, well, I don't know that for sure, but I know this idiot in Massachusetts I could call who maybe would have information about this. Hang on. So she gets on the phone, she calls me, and it's, yes, Donald Duck did several cartoons during World War II, Sergeant Duck and, various different names. And so she goes back to her commander and says, yes. Then he goes, did he ever retire from the military? And called me back and said, no, I don't think so, but hang on. I know Dave Smith. So I called the Disney Archive, and Dave goes through all of his papers and nope, never retired. And so this base commander, seriously, this is his big idea. He's going to hold a retirement ceremony for Donald Duck. All right. And again, just keep in mind, folks, this is your tax dollar at work. All right. He calls the Disney company. They love this idea. They go down to the closet and they pull out every duck costume that's ever existed in the history of man. So Huey, Dewey, Louie, Daisy, Ludwig von Drake, Uncle Scrooge, they're all coming. All right. And they're coming to 29 Palms. And get in not only that, but in vintage 1940s cars. And, then Disney creates this uniform for Donald that I guess he's still a private at this point. And the base, on the other hand, assembles a pageant. Okay, we're talking about 1,500 soldiers, pass in review. We're talking a full military band, color guard, the works, all right? Again, and you paid for this, all right? And it all came down to this picture that wound up in the paper of the general smiling into the camera as he hands Donald, in his World War II uniform, his retirement certificate. And it says, Buck Sergeant Duck, because of course they promoted him before they let him out of the service. My friend writes a story to go with the photograph, and it gets great play on the West Coast. And she sends me a copy of the article, and she sends me an 8x10 of the photo. And I read her article, and it's great. It's fun, but the photo's killer. And I call Marjorie back and go say, look, if I ask nice, can I, I'll use your photo, I'll credit your name to it, but can I write a version of this article, because I'd love to do this for my base newspaper, because I think it's funny as hell. And she says, no, absolutely. You helped, with the research, and do what you want. But what difference was, my version got picked up by the AP wire service and went worldwide. Hers did well on the West Coast, but suddenly I'm in Britain, I'm in Germany, I'm everywhere, and I get this call from Disney, and they said, God, we loved your article. It was really funny and very interesting and well researched. And by the way, we're holding the 30th anniversary of Disneyland, and we were wondering if you'd like to come out and cover that. And it's like, oh, sure. And that's kind of how it started. That was a bizarre event. I mean, they had a 30-hour long party. So the park was open from like 6 o'clock at night till a day or so later, 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember distinctly, they really let us do things we should not have been allowed to do. I actually stood on the roofs of Main Street, USA, and looked down at all of the people running back and forth. And there was a lot of really rotten plywood up there. I could have wound up in the Emporium real easy. Also, they let us climb all over the Main Street electrical parades. They were parked backstage between Main Street and Tomorrowland. And this was about the same time that Return to Oz, the movie, had come out. And I was one of the only people on the planet who really liked Return to Oz. So they had TikTok, the Royal Army of Oz, the little brass guy there. And, oh my God, it must be the one from the film. And I lean down and I look, and it's like, it's got the plaques. It's like you turn this one for the brain and you turn this one for his action. And, so I had to try. I turned the key and it came off in my hand. And about this moment, the Disney security came around the corner and I jumped off the float and ran into the press tent. So somewhere down in the basement, I still have TikTok's key. And it's one of my nightmares that some night TikTok is eventually going to find me. It's like, where's my key? But no, that's the thing. That was the event where I got to meet a lot of the Disney legends who had come out, who had worked in the park, and I got to interview them. And they liked that I actually knew who they were and what they'd done. And they would say, the next time in California, you want to come to the house, do things like I got to go to Mark and Alice Davis's house. In fact, that was with my ex, Michelle. Mark was kind of a prankster. You'd go into his studio and go to sit down in a chair, and he'd be, oh, by the way, that's Walt's chair. And everybody for some reason would just jump out of the chair because that, oh my God, it's just like, this has Walt's aspirin in it. But yeah, he shared great stories about attractions that he worked on, and year after year after year, of talking with people and interviewing people and them introducing me to other folks. It's kind of mushroomed and blossomed since then. And now, these days, I have my own website, Jim Hill Media. I also write for the Huffington Post. And so that's where it really got strange when I started working for HuffPo, because suddenly I went from somebody who worked basically in the Disney blogosphere and people liked what I did to suddenly it was like, oh, could you talk about our movie? And it's just this whole notion of, because again, I get to talk to the huge Huffington Post audience as opposed to the small Disney blogosphere audience. And so the joke I make is I get a much nicer class of people saying no now, just this whole notion of, but at the same time, you get to help. I mean, just right now, for example, Glenn Keane has left the Walt Disney Company and is doing, you might have actually seen this pop up online, that his private passion project that he's done for Google Plus Duet. This is the thing that's actually, you're going to be able to, it's sort of design animation. That's the first piece of classically drawn, hand-drawn animation that's being done for a handheld device. It's a very different concept of movie making. I mean, the notion is if you hold it directly in front of you, you have this amazing piece of animation. But if you move it to either side, there's actually pieces of animation that key off of that. I mean, the whole notion of you're surrounded by animation. And at the same time, they're telling this wonderful story. And this is actually a passion project for Glenn. Glenn's actually working with his son, Max, who, for those of you who love Tarzan and Tarzan sort of skateboarding his way through the trees, that's Max. That's Glenn got that idea by watching his son skateboard in the driveway. And wouldn't it be cool if Tarzan did that? Meanwhile, if you saw Tangled and loved for example, the little baby girl version of Rapunzel, that's his granddaughter. That's they modeled baby Rapunzel after the granddaughter. In fact, Glenn's daughter Claire was one of the art directors in Tangled. So they're all three of them working on this amazing piece of animation. And where I come in is I'm the one who gets to write the article that helps to sort of raise the awareness of it. And what's really cool is this wonderful opportunity coming up in a week or so where Disney's finally putting Tarzan out on Blu-ray. And I reached out to Glenn and said, hey, we've got that great story about, you watching your son skateboard, and why don't we tell that story as a way to say, hey, and now you and your son are working together on this film. I think honestly, that's kind of what I'm doing now. I used to do a lot of Disney history. I used to do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And now I just feel like I've kind of mutated into this position of like, well, how can I help? For example, I was just contacted by a gentleman who's writing a book about the Disney online fan community. And it was just one of these things where he was interviewing me to get some stories. And at the same time, I thought, well, you should probably be reaching out to the theme park press people. They do a lot of Disney titles these days, and I'm sure that they would help, or this sounds like a book they'd be interested in, and contact them, tell them I told you, told them to reach out, and if there's anything else I can do to help to open the doors. Again, I wouldn't have gotten where I am today, wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now, if a lot of people, whether they're Disney legends or people who are working on animated films or that sort of thing, hadn't been nice enough to go, okay, fine, I'll listen to the fat man's questions. And they liked the articles that I wrote, and they in turn introduced me to their friends or held open doors for me. So I feel it's really part of my job to pay it back. The whole notion of if somebody comes and asks me for information, I share. If somebody, needs help, an introduction or a door held open, I feel that's part of my gig as well. What's really kind of fun is my own daughter, Alice, has started doing what I do now. In fact, we were just talking about this off mic, that she went and covered the Muppets Most Wanted premiere for JHM and did a great job. And she's actually headed to Comic-Con next week and going to be covering that for the site while Dad stays home and writes. I guess she also has the gift for asking questions that people like, and they open up and tell great stories. Boy, that's a really long-winded answer. We still have time to record at this point, or no, I'm sorry, Jim, we're done. That one question ended the show. So, good night, everybody. So.
No, hopefully you didn't answer too many of my future questions.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, back up the truck.
So what does writing mean to you?
I don't know. All of my heroes are writers. John Steinbeck, Neil Simon, Gene Shepard, Larry Gelbart, people who can not only inform but entertain, can make you laugh. The one thing that stands out differently from the stuff I do than a lot of people do online about Disney or theme parks or animation is I'm always in it for the stories. I'm always in it for if I can make you laugh and I can make you think. For example, I just interviewed the guys who are doing Planes, Fire, and Rescue. And there was this wonderful moment out of the interview where they were talking about, you ever watch when a plane is dropping chemicals in a fire, that weird sort of red crap that comes out the back. It has a technical name, but for the people, the aerial firefighters, the way they refer to it, it's either mud or slurry. And what it is you deliberately drop it in front of the fire, and it sort of it's kind of this salt-based stuff that stops the fire from spreading. It creates this artificial chemical barrier. And I'm talking with Paul Girard, who's the creative director for Disney Toon Studios, and he says, so I'm at the Hemet Ryan Air Attack base in California, which is actually located Riverside, California, literally just down the road, basically from Glendale, where the Disney Media Campus is. He says, so I couldn't help myself. So I reached out and I touched this stuff, and it feels like snot. All right. And it's like one of these things, and I know snot because I have an 8-year-old son. All right. And so, he said, I made the mistake of mentioning it to the other animators and artists who had come along on this field trip, that they actually went to the base so they could design the characters and based on the actual vehicles, and also, sort of the look of the base. He says, ooh, this stuff feels like snot. And so the animators to a man went, really? Can I touch it? And it was just this whole notion of that animators in their heart of hearts are really just big kids. That's one of the reasons that you get that sense of fun and joy that comes through really good animation, because they've kept the kid alive in them. And just the whole notion of here's this group of supposed grown-ups where somebody says, hey, this feels like snot. It's like, oh, I got to touch that. I love stories like that. I love stuff that humanizes people, that makes the person who makes the animated film or makes your favorite movie or makes your favorite attraction relatable. Makes them sound like a person, not a press release. But yeah, I mean, that's what I love about writing. If you can do that, if you can bring people sort of behind the curtain and talk about their favorite movie in a way that surprises them. For example, Frozen, the whole notion of 2 years before that movie hit theaters, they didn't know Anna and Elsa were sisters. I mean, think about that. They had labored for years where the Ice Queen was this kind of comic villain. In fact, relatively recent version of this where the idea was that Elsa or the Ice Queen was either going to be voiced by Megan Mullally, who you may know from Will and Grace, played the Karen character who was really obnoxious, or Bette Midler, the whole note of this big brassy showgirl. And, an entirely different, think about what an entirely different movie that would have been. That kind, nice, sweet Anna dealing with Bette Midler. And it was somebody just at Disney drew this drawing of the two of them standing back to back and sort of looking sisterly. And somebody's like, oh my God, they're sisters. Wouldn't that be bizarre? And this whole movie grows out of one drawing. And even then, just 2 years out. It's like, that's good. That's great. Okay, that's in theaters November 2013. And everybody hard charges at it. Just the notion of they did it. They actually pulled it off on that impossible schedule, that effects-heavy movie. They were smart enough to bring Kirsten and Bobby Lopez in to do the music. And it all became this huge phenomena that I will tell you flat out, they didn't know what they had. August of last year, Nancy and I were invited down to a screening in New York. We were the first civilians to get to see Frozen, and we're in the world's tiniest screening room. I swear there's like 15, 16 seats. It's on Fifth Avenue in New York, and 51st and 5th, I think. And we're sitting in an audience full of people with suits and ties and looking very severe, and they start the movie. Nobody laughs. Nobody applauds. Nobody says anything. The movie ends, and Nancy's like, wow, we kind of enjoyed that. Why is everyone so quiet? And it turns out we're in a room full of agents, and they're watching the movie. All they care about is how their client came across. In fact, I remember as I was leaving, the woman standing by the door who ran the press event, and what did you think? And this woman who represented both Idina Menzel and Kristen Bell, well, I think it serviced my clients very well. It's like, did you like the movie? I think it serviced my clients very well. 2 or 3 days later, I'm in LA and they're doing the long lead media event. So finally I end up, everybody gets a chance to talk to everybody. So I finally end up sitting down with Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, the two co-directors of this. And they lean in close because I'm the only one all the other members of the press have only seen 20 minutes of this movie. They've only seen, and they only showed us action scenes. I mean, the snow guy chasing after Anna and Kristoff, and I think the one song they showed us was "Let It Go," but everything else is action, and comedy, and the musical. What musical? You are out of your mind. This isn't a musical. But they lean in close because I'm the only one who's seen it. It's like, did it work? Is it okay? Is it good? And they didn't know. I mean, they're literally, they're 6 weeks away from at this point it being released at theaters, and they didn't know what they had. So they were just, please tell us it's good. It's like, oh my God, is it good? And so, oh, good. Oh, wow. Okay. We were worried because, you work on something like that for so long and you're so close to it. You don't know how people are going to respond, which I guess we could discuss Muppet Was Wanted at this point, Joe, or you could move to another topic. Hey, what's the next question? So.
Well, what would you say inspires you?
What inspires me is getting information out. When somebody hands me a good story, or I'm able to connect dots. I mean, for example, there was a story I wrote once called Disney's Long, Long Road to Oz. And it was one of the more popular things I ever wrote for the web, but it was one of these things where people can be like, wow, that's a great story. It's like, well, good. I'm glad you liked it. It took 15 years. I mean, it took a long time to pull all of those stories together and the little bits and pieces that people had told me over time and just sort of to string them all together and come up with a cohesive whole that told you about how Walt back in the 1930s, did actually pursue the rights to The Wizard of Oz, and only to find out that Samuel Goldwyn had them, and then when they became available, MGM snatched them. But the reason MGM snatched them is because Snow White had just come out and was making more money than God, and it's like, suddenly MGM's like, well, I want one of those. And so it's like, all right, so we could turn, The Wizard of Oz into a musical. the Return to Oz and the thing that Disney was going to do there. And that was actually produced by Gary Kurtz, but it was directed by Walter Murch, who was the gentleman who did all of the sound editing, I want to say, or the editing for Star Wars. And Disney just wanted somebody associated with Star Wars to be in charge of that movie. And he did a great job, but it was a dark, weird movie that it took a couple of decades for people to find it and like it. But yeah, I mean, to get back to it, that sort of stuff excites me, that to get a story out there or to step into a situation where people think is one thing and is really another. And you have to sort of apply the lessons of history and go, I mean, for example, everyone's right now kind of fretting about the subs for Disneyland, and they're coming back for the 60th anniversary, but are they going to stay after that? And the hard reality is that the subs, since they opened in 59, have been an operational nightmare. I mean, back then they were powered by diesel, and they always gave off these horrible fumes. And in order to make the water clear enough for people to look out through the portholes and actually see the show scenes, that's things chlorinated up the yin yang. And so that means your beautifully colored coral after 6 to 8 months fades away. And likewise, the strings that held the fish into place corrode and snap and the fish float away. So it was one of these things where every year they had to shut it down for a prolonged rehab and repaint. And so when it closed in the late 90s, there were a lot of people in Disney like, oh, God, thank God that ride has gone away. But it turns out that John Lasseter, who'd worked at the park in the 60s, loved it. And there was this thing called Finding Nemo that they wanted to put in the parks. And, so they brought it back, and I want to say 2007. But it still has a lot of the problems that it had back in 59. It's got low capacity. It's a maintenance nightmare. And so if you're a subs fan, I would suggest seeing them next year during Disneyland's 60th, because I'm not entirely convinced what with everything that's planned for Tomorrowland, what with the Star Warsization of that side of the park, that the subs are going to survive that. They need a lot of room for what they're planning to do for Star Wars in the parks. And it's entirely possible the subs will fall victim to a higher capacity attraction that celebrates Star Wars. So if you want to find Nemo, you better look for him soon. That's what I'm saying. So
you are talking about 20 Leagues Under the Sea, right?
No. This is the Disneyland version. The subs out there, the ones for Florida, the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, of course. That again, same thing. They shut that down, and I want to say 94 for a quote unquote temporary rehab, and then 2 years later, basically admitted, nah, we're closed. And that, of course, eventually became New Fantasyland. Though there was this wonderful little moment where, for a time there, it was going to be where New Fantasyland is now. The whole Ariel's, the Bell's Village, the Be Our Guest restaurant, that was going to be Disney's Villain Village. There was this great idea that basically there'd be this sort of weird, scary gate, and every morning it would open, and the villains could come out of where Disney kept them locked up at night. Because, again, you want to keep an eye on these guys. And so if you went down into the village, there would be, it wasn't Gaston's Tavern, but it was, I'm forgetting the villain they had it built around, but there was an Ursula Spinner. There was, no, it was the puppeteer Stromboli's sort of restaurant tavern, kind of a dark, scary place where you could go to eat and where the villains would hang out. In fact, there was this great idea that they actually tried to revive with Gaston's. Turns out they didn't accommodate space for this. There was supposed to be this great show that would happen every day at 5 o'clock if you were down by Stromboli's. And eventually, again, they wanted to sort of revive this idea for Gaston's. And you'd start to notice that from different sides of the park, here comes Captain Hook, and here comes Maleficent, and here comes the old hag from, Snow White. And they'd all meet up at the bar, and they'd kind of crestfallen, and they'd order a drink, and they would proceed to, I almost had her. I swear to God, I had her. I gave her the apple, and those stupid dwarves. And just the notion of these, that evidently was supposed to build into this great musical number about how the villains almost succeeded, but they're going to buck their spirits up, and tomorrow they're going to go out again and try to defeat these stupid princesses and that kid in the green thing that flew. And, and it was this great idea. And I keep hoping that bubbles up again. In fact, that's the other thing I think that's important about my job is that I'll hear about this stuff. I'll hear about people, various ideas, and kind of the problem with Imagineering right now is it's not got a lot of institutional memory. It's a lot of newer people or younger people who've risen up through the ranks, but they don't know, they don't know their own history. And it's just one of those things where it's like, why don't you guys revisit that villain idea? It's like, what villain idea? Go to the files, go pull the files. And sure enough, they'll pull the files. And there's things like the Villain Mountain theme park attraction that was actually supposed to be built. This kind of keyed off of the fact that Splash Mountain had huge lines. And so the belief within Disney is like, wow, we need another flume ride. And meanwhile, we have 20,000 Leagues of Balloon just sitting empty. And wouldn't it be cool if, maybe we could do a flume ride into that? And then somebody was saying, well, we're doing the Villain Village. And it's like, what if we did a ride that had all of the villains in it? And again, I got lucky. One of my friends who worked for the company for a number of years liked this idea so much that when he was leaving Disney, he spent his last afternoon at Imagineering color Xeroxing all of the concept art. So I've seen it. I've seen the art for the Villain Mountain, and it had a really killer gimmick. The whole notion is it's a standard flume ride. In fact, you do that classic scene that you do in every flume ride when they have to get you up to the top of, so you junk up the show scene where you start to begin your descent down the mountain. And in this room, you're in with Maleficent. And so she turns and sees you, and you can actually see where your boat is supposed to go in the next room. And even in enough Disney theme park rides to know, okay, so I'm in a trough, I'm at the top. That's the next room we're going to go in. That's where I drop out of it. It's like, so, okay, I'm comfortable. It's like, no. What happens is Maleficent waves her staff, a hole blows in the wall next to you, and your flume vehicle now sort of heels over in this direction and falls through this hole in the wall. And, you dive straight down to the bottom of the building out of this show scene. As you're diving, you're going in between Ursula's tentacles because she's trying to grab you and stop you. And you end up at the bottom and you're surrounded by flames. And suddenly you hear the sound of a fire extinguisher and the flames start to go out. And as the clouds clear, it's Hades from Hercules with a fire extinguisher. It's like, hi, I'm Hades, Lord of the Dead. How you doing? And that's the sort of ride it was going to be. It was this really funny ride that played with your knowledge of the villains and also played with your knowledge of how theme park attractions work. I mean, the whole notion of, wait a minute, that's where I'm supposed to be going. Well, you ain't going there. And again, the finale of the ride, I don't know how they would have pulled it off, but you get to the very top of the mountain for the big splashdown. And it's only as you enter the room, you realize that you're basically in between Chernabog's hands. And he wakes up as you are there, in the room in his presence, and his hands start to reach toward you to grab the boat. And it's just at that precise second when he's going to get you that you fall down the outside thing. But again, killer attraction. The art's there. They could turnkey on this thing tomorrow. It's designed, it's planned, but nobody remembers it except me because I got to see the art in Justin Jorgensen's living room. So go figure.
Not to name any names or anything.
Not to name any names. But if you're looking for where the art is, go to Justin's house.
Well, originally, how was your dream of writing received by your family members?
I come from a family of teachers, so there was a lot of pressure to become a teacher because the whole notion was like, look, if you want to seriously write, you could be an English teacher and you'd have your summers off and you could write then. And I almost went that route until I had graduated high school. I was starting to go to college in Birmingham State in Massachusetts when this is a hard story to tell, but basically my favorite English teacher on the planet, an amazing guy, introduced me to people like Robert Benchley and Dorothy Parker. I mean, writers I love to this day. And, I enjoyed this guy so much during high school. I must have taken 3 and 4 different classes with him. Amazing guy. And in fact, I so enjoyed working with him, I became the co-editor of the yearbook because he was the guy who was in charge of the yearbook. And a girl who lived on my street was the other co-editor of the yearbook. Really funny, very talented young lady. And I just figured this is the sort of English teacher I want to be. I mean, this is the guy who gets people excited about writers, and and is really in touch with the students, and this is who I want to emulate. And so September, October, November that year, I get a call from, again, my co-editor of the yearbook, who kind of pulls me aside and says, I want you to be the first to know, but I'm pregnant. It's like, oh, that's kind of a surprise. And who's the father? And it's the English teacher. And it was one of these things where it's like, and this was the guy who I was modeling my path after. All right. It's like, that's the sort of teacher I want to be. And he gets my best friend from high school pregnant. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's a bad guy. In fact, I've met him since. He's still a wonderful person, and I'm still friendly with the young lady. In fact, the daughter she's such a great kid, such a great adult now. But it was one of these wake up moments where it's like, if I follow that path, in 20 years, I'm going to be making the same exact mistakes. I'm going to end up being that same English teacher who gets bored or takes a stupid risk. And this was actually, again, this is 77, where you were allowed to resign. You didn't end up on Fox News. All right. And that's what kind of spurred me to maybe I shouldn't teach. The interesting thing is having, again, a family of teachers now, all I hear my brothers and sister talking about is how tough it is to teach now, where you have things like No Child Left Behind, where you're suddenly in this situation where you aren't really teaching kids to teach. You're teaching kids how to take a test so they can then prove that they've been taught. And it's just, teaching has become something different over the last couple of decades. So in a weird sort of way, I'm glad I went in this direction. It was a tougher path. I mean, the thing of writing is that, particularly when I was coming up, you chase a good steady gig like working for a newspaper, because that was, a steady paycheck. But on the other hand, there was good money to be made in magazines, but you had to send something off and hope and pray it was what they were looking for, or that the editor liked you, and then wait for the check to come back. So it was tough. At the same time, tried different types of writing. For a couple of years there, I tried my hand at screenwriting, and that I came scarily close to actually making that work. I actually got a script optioned for a Haunted Mansion movie that Disney was going to try to make with the folks at Keystone, which are the people who make all of the Air Bud movies for Disney. And, they optioned the script. I got a very nice check. But again, it was kind of conditional on, and as soon as we see how well Hocus Pocus does at the box office, we're going to make a decision about Haunted Mansion. And I know everybody loves Hocus Pocus now, but when it came out in 94, 93, did not make a whole lot of money. The Haunted Mansion just stopped there. But I also wrote a sample script for a version of The Adventurers Club as a sitcom that was going to be shot in Orlando. And the Disney Channel, that made that very high up. It was very strange, because they were excited about the idea of being able to use, say, Epcot as sort of a setting that they could send the adventurers off and they could go to China or Africa or that sort of thing. And I wrote a sample script and a treatment for like 6 or 7 episodes after that. It was kind of interesting that this was the Disney Channel trying to decide what it wanted to be when it grew up. And they, it's like, look, we have this Adventurers Club thing from Jim Hill, and we have this script called Lizzie McGuire. What should we do? And, I think we all know the end of that story. Lizzie McGuire begat Miley Cyrus, the Hannah Montana, and now we're in, places like Mighty Med or Dog with a Blog. They were just discovering that they wanted to do sitcoms for kids, and that's where they are now. So, it's interesting to wonder what would have happened if I'd gone that route. But I always feel bad for people who spend entirely too much time staring in the rearview mirror. Yeah, it was an opportunity. It would have been cool if that had happened. But because it didn't happen, other equally fun opportunities came along. And right now, as I was mentioning earlier, it just, you never know what the day is going to bring. Just this morning, up getting coffee, and here comes the FedEx truck rundling up the driveway, and they drop off a box full of Big Hero 6 stuff. And I'm just now talking with the folks at Walt Disney Studios about what are the story opportunities here? Who can I talk to? And it's interesting because I've actually interviewed a bunch of these guys before. Roy Connolly, the producer of this, is the producer of Winnie the Pooh. Likewise, Don Hall is one of the directors on that. And I've talked with all of them before. The nice thing is when you're interviewing somebody you've interviewed previously, and if it's gone well, you can get through that 5 minutes of, well, how's your kids? Very quickly and just get to the actual meat of the conversation and hopefully get some cool stories. But that's, again, that's what I'm doing now.
So how was all this Disney fame received by your friend who wrote the original article that you got her permission to use to write your article to become Mr. Jim Hill?
Honestly, the became Mr. Jim Hill. That took 30 years. And to be honest, Marjorie went on to have a great career in really for real writing. She wrote the magazines, newspapers. She's very happy with her life now. But at the same time, I never planned on writing for the web. I mean, I was a magazine newspaper guy, and I got a call in, I want to say 98 from my ex-wife, Michelle. And she was working with Al Lutz on the precursor for Mouse Planet, the website called the Disneyland Information Guide. And they had just decided that they wanted to start doing publishing stories on a regular basis. They didn't know if they would do, 2 or 3 a week or 5 a week or what they were going to do. But Michelle thought, well, Jim writes and he knows a lot about Disney. Let me call him. She was like, look, can you do just one story? We just need one. And as it turns out, Kim Masters' book about Michael Eisner had just come out. The title of that book, it had a great subtitle. It was The Rise of Michael Eisner and the Fall of Everybody Else. And I'd read it and thought, okay, this is fun. Just threw together a quick review of it. And that got published. I have to admit, that was my first taste of the immediacy of the web. I mean, I handed it off, and I'm a guy who, all right, so you write something for a newspaper, and it has to go through an editor, and there's 24 hours before it comes into print. Or God help you if you're writing for a magazine where it can be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days before you see it. And the web thing was handed it off to Al, and an hour later, it's up on the web. And it's like, wow, that's cool. And it was that first little taste of heroin. Ooh, and then from there, just like, ooh, that was fun. I want to do that again. And that's where I am now. I mean, it's kind of fun. For example, right now, as we're recording this, I stopped working on an article I'm doing about planes, fire, and rescue. I've got a piece that as soon as we wrap up here, I go over, put it up on HuffPo, and that's bizarre. I mean, HuffPo is this big worldwide organization, just, new medium. And for the longest time, I just treated it like, magazine or newspaper. It's like, okay, I'm working for the big boys. So, I'd contact my editor and say, hey, I got an idea for a story and I'm doing an interview next week. And would you like to do this? Sure. And so say 90 days, 3 months after I started, eventually my editor said, Jim, you understand about the whole blog idea, right? You got the job. I mean, you don't have to actually ask my permission to write about something. We trust you. We like you. We wouldn't have reached out if we didn't like what you do. But even then, there was still this sort of weird period where you'd submit it, and sometimes it'd be an hour, sometimes it would be 6 hours before things would be posted on HuffPo's entertainment page. And about 3 months ago, this changed. And this is just kind of shocking to me. Again, I guess over time they decided we can trust Jim. He's not going to do anything stupid. So it's like now I submit something to HuffPo and it just completely bypasses editorial. It just goes up. And that's nuts to me. I mean, just the whole notion of HuffPo goes out to 30 to 32 million people worldwide. And it's like, shouldn't there be somebody to kind of look at that and go, oh, he says Walt Disney is alive and tap dancing in Toledo. That can't be real. Can that? And, so it's like, well, he wrote it, put it up, and it just goes. It's, so I don't know. I both love this era that we work in for instant media, but at the same time, it occasionally scares the crap out of me because again, that whole notion of click and send and it goes to all of these people. I mean, at least when it's Jim Hill Media and I screw up, it's just sort of like, okay, my small group of my readers, I'm sorry, I won't do that again. Where it's HuffPo. I mean, that's why I always try to fact check out the wazoo, because once it goes, it goes.
With great power comes great responsibility, and I mean that you're living it.
But, just that there's a line out of The Rescuers. I always bring this up when people talk about this. That there's a moment out of The Rescuers that I love where it's Penny, at the boat. You've seen her in tears, and now here come Bernard and Bianca, and they're going to rescue her. And it's like, and she looks at them and she's grateful that they're there. But she also says, didn't you bring anyone big with you, like the police? That's the thing. I just keep thinking with HuffPo. It's like, isn't there somebody big here? Isn't there somebody who really should be in control? Like, no, go ahead. Put up your story. We trust you.
So once you decided you wanted to be a writer and you were about to embark on being an adult, leaving high school, what steps did you take?
I think the thing of writing is there's a line that Lawrence Kasdan, the gentleman who wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Big Chill, and oddly enough, they brought him back to work on episode 7 of Star Wars for Disney. He said this really interesting thing that stuck with me, that a career in writing is like having homework for the rest of your life. All right. So that's the thing of, every so often I'll counsel writers, that people will reach out to me with an idea or a book proposal or something like that. And the whole notion of, I wrote it, it's done. And it's like, really? You didn't reread it? Every time I read something that I wrote, all that jumps out at me is like, oh, the errors, oh, you moron. It's like, I could do so much better. And so you rewrite and you rewrite and rewrite. And even when you put things out into the world, you look at it like, oh, I forgot that. I should have put that in there. So it's always about, you have to work at your craft. You have to be willing to do the research. You have to put in the time. The gentleman who wrote The Tipping Point talks about, in order to get good at what you do, and I'm not saying I'm good at what I do. I got lucky. For some reason, people like the crap that I write. All right. I have a way to tell a story that's reasonably amusing. But these gentlemen, the gentleman who did The Tipping Point talks about the 10,000 hour rule, that you have to do something in order to get proficient or good, or he always makes the example of the Beatles had to play in those horrible clubs in Germany for 10,000 hours before they became the Beatles, before they became really comfortable with one another and knew one another's riffs and knew how to do the harmonies, and that's how they became the Beatles. Neil Simon, who wrote all those wonderful plays, The Odd Couple, the Chapter 2, Prisoner of Second Avenue, he spent hundreds of hours working, writing sketches for Sid Caesar and Phil Silver. And, you have to practice your craft. You have to put in the time. And, the nice thing about the web is, when I was coming up, it was magazines and newspapers. And you had to hope and pray that when you submitted something that, somebody opens a manila envelope, reads it, thinks you're funny, and will publish your story. And so there was this whole pyramid structure where you had to have the early person who was reading the slush pile, like what you did, who handed it to the editor above them, who then handed it to the editor-in-chief, who signed off on the idea, who said, okay, we will deem to publish this and send, the idiot in Massachusetts a check. Nowadays, in the world of blogs, the pyramid structure is a pancake. Of course, the problem is getting people's attention because there's a billion blogs out there. But anybody can write now, and anybody can catch people's attention. It's always amazing to me to watch who breaks through. But, the weird thing that is that the people who do, in fact, break through typically have a unique view or, bring some fun, interesting stuff to the table. If I'm encouraging people to enter this field, it's a great time. There's no editors barring the way. The only thing that's barring the way is you. You have to be the one. But again, the other thing you have to understand about writing for the web, I think I mentioned this about the Wizard of Oz story. 15 years to write that story. And people are like, oh, I like that. That was really good. I really enjoyed that. What else you got? And, the very next day, I talk about when I write for the web, you got to understand this is like you get up every day and throw a brick in the Grand Canyon. All right. The web's appetite for new content is bottomless, all right, unending. So no matter how well you do, no matter how many podcasts you've recorded, no matter how many stories you've written, it's like, that's good. What else you got? And you have to be able to produce. You have to be self-disciplined enough to go, yes, I would love to sit and watch all 8 of the Harry Potter movies as they are showing on ABC Family this weekend, but I got to sit down and crank out a story. So that's what you do. And you have to make sacrifices. Just this week coming up, I am so far in the weeds in regard to stories that I am overdue on and stuff I got to get done. Next week in San Diego is San Diego is the white hot center of the pop culture universe. They're doing Comic-Con for 4.5 days. All of these amazing people come to one place and do these amazing presentations. And I was credentialed. I'm all set to go. I got a wonderful room at a bed and breakfast. It's a mile away from the hall. And I had to stare down the barrel and go, I can't go. I got to stay home and work. So luckily, I have a beautiful, smart daughter who can go in my place and do a lot of interviews. And I have a nice, understanding ex-wife who will also go and do some interviews. And even her husband now does some photography for the site. I mean, it's weird. We're a sitcom about to happen, folks. I understand that. But still, they help out. Sometimes you have to do that. You have to stare down the barrel of, it's like I'll be at a press event. Ooh, there's still shrimp and they're still serving alcohol. And ooh, there's cake. And it's like, no, I got to go back to the room and write. You got to walk out of the party and go work. You can't play. And it's weird because, again, just like every so often I find myself, this weird space where it's like, come down, the universe has come down for the opening of Diagon Alley, and it was a great invite, but it was just this whole notion of, oh, I got to go to Florida again. And that means changing planes in Philadelphia, and I got to pack and I got to do laundry, and it's just sort of like, anybody else, I'm going to a theme park, yay! And I'm like, oh, I'm going to the proctologist again, and I better wear my good pants. Just again, you have to sometimes remind yourself, no, you have a gig that other people would kill for. It's like, come see our cartoon, come let us send you a box of swag, come down to our theme park and ride a new. Again, that was the thing. We got to ride on Gringotts, during a time when they couldn't really keep the ride running. And it's a great ride. That's why I actually lived in Orlando for 4 years in the 90s. That was actually when Michelle and I lived there, I want to say 93 to 97 before we split. And every so often people will say, well, why aren't you in California? Why are you doing this in New Hampshire? And I honestly think that there were a lot of folks who are actually in the Orlando area who are covering Disney now. And I kind of feel sorry for them because sometimes I'll go to the park with them and they will pick the weirdest stuff to get oh, look, they didn't paint the bench the right color. Oh my God, that trash can is 6 inches too far away from the entrance. It's one of these things where it's like, you don't notice the $100 million attraction right in front of you. It's like, no, the flowers are in the wrong place. It's weird. They live in the candy shop now. And because they live in the candy shop and they go to the candy shop every day, they've lost their taste for chocolate. For the rest of us, going to Disney World or going to Disneyland, that's a treat. All right. And you walk in and, ooh, look at the ride, and there's a parade and fireworks. And they're the ones, it's like, well, I got to go over and get pictures of the construction wall because, they put up a different wall. They get obsessed about the wrong end of it. And sometimes they forget. And that's the thing. I always try to, whenever I find myself drifting in the direction of like, oh God, I got to get in a plane and go to do something. And it's like, you moron, shut up. There are hundreds of people that would say, get rid of him. I will take Jim Hill's place. I will do that. And I will be excited, and so you have to keep that in mind. You can't get jaded. And that's tough sometimes. Because now we live in a world where it's not just Disney doing great things in theme parks, it's Universal. And SeaWorld's also doing some pretty impressive stuff. And there's lots of little parks, and God, in animation, there's Pixar, there's DreamWorks, there's Disney Toon Studios, there's Blue Sky. Warner's just did this amazing Lego movie, and they're going to get even crazier into animation. And you got to stay on top. And where that gets interesting is, of course, all the people who are working at these studios now are former Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks employees. So, these are people I've interviewed in the past, and they're like, hey, come talk about my movie. So it's like, all right. So I'll try.
So what roadblocks have you hit along the way?
I don't like being the type of guy who bitches about stuff, but it was tough in 2001 when Al Lutz tossed me off of Mouse Planet. That was weird. I was actually talking with David Koenig, who still writes for Mouse Planet, and another writer who worked there. And we were, Mouse Planet had sort of peaked at that point. They had really been riding the construction of Disney's California Adventure, and the park had just opened. And yeah, we knew the park had problems, but it was just one of these things where it's like, I was talking with David, and it's like, again, coming out of the magazine newspaper world, it's like, I don't think this website can sustain momentum just writing about DCA. I thought that, it would be a smart time at that point to sort of diversify, just have everybody. And again, I wanted to do what we did out of the print world, so everyone would have an individual beat. And so it was like, David and I were talking about, well, what could we do? Well, I could cover animation and you could do theme parks, so we could have Al do gossip. And we were going to pitch this to Al. And Al, for some reason, found out, thought it was threatening, and inside of a 5-hour period, threw me off of Mouse Planet, delisted everything that I'd ever written to the site. And, and again, it was weird because I had been there part of growing this site and growing the audience but it was his site, and he tossed me out. And then from there, I struggled, for a year and a half, 2 years, trying to find a new niche. I went and worked with the folks at Laughing Place, and Doobie and Rebecca Mosley are really, really sweet people, and they're good friends to this day, but it just didn't work. I wrote a little sharper than I think they were interested in. They loved the history and stuff that I did. They were always a little worried about possibly offending people. I think it's Mark Twain that said, that if you're not offending somebody, you're really not doing your job as a writer. Somebody's got to be offended. And then I worked Tony Ward on DCA Central, and that's a site that crashed and burned. So I was out in California visiting with my ex and my daughter, and DCA Central, was falling apart while I was out there, and getting on a plane to go home. And it's like, oh God, I got to start again. I got to find a place to write on the web. And from the time it took me to fly home from Long Beach to New Hampshire, Michelle went out and bought the domain name Jim Hill Media and set it up and said, all right, it's yours, run it. And for the longest time, I actually thought Jim Hill Media was a stupid name for a website. Again, I come from this fairly large family. There's 7 of us, my parents and 3 brothers and a sister. And again, when you come from a family of that size, you're not supposed to, it's all about me. It's like, no, moron, there's a lot of us here. So it just seemed to me that the name Jim Hill Media was incredibly egotistical. But Michelle was, very persistent. In fact, her catchphrase for the website was like, finally a website that won't fire him. And as it turns out, it was actually a really smart move, one I personally never would have made, but it was like weirdly branding because my name was on the site and I wrote stories for the site. So, oh, you're Jim Hill. And it took me a long time to be comfortable saying, hi, I'm Jim Hill of Jim Hill Media. It's like, hi, I'm from the Department of Redundancy Department. I mean, it just seemed like a really stupid name. But over time, the internet finally became legit, and it became easier to say, hi, I'm a blogger, as opposed to a writer. So that was tough. I mean, when you're part of something and getting thrown out of it arbitrarily, that's tough, and not being able to fit. But yeah, I mean, I guess the lesson there was just, you have to persist and you have to do what you do and hope that people like it. And I got lucky, just about the same time I'm getting Jim Hill Media out of the ground, I go to a mega mouse meet in Florida. And that's where I meet Len Testa and Bob Salinger, the editor and the publisher of the Unofficial Guide. And they're doing a group photo of us, all of us Disney dweebs in one place. And so I'm at the back of the thing with Len and Bob, and I'm basically doing what I've done my entire life, which you whisper things under your voice and you make people laugh around you. Bob and Len had never met a funny Disney person up to that point. They've been very sweet and very serious about Disney. And here was this fat man at the back of the pile joking about Disney. And it's like, ooh, we like you. And that's how I ended up first writing the Disney Dish items for the Unofficial Guide. I think I've done them for like 10 years now. And then the weird offshoot about 2.5, 3 years ago, Len decided, this might be fun to do. I have fun talking to you. I think other people would have fun listening to us talk, and that became the Unofficial Guide Disney Dish podcast, and that took off in a really weird way. It's just a lot of them are just Len and I walking around the park, and he turns in the mic and says, "Okay, fat man, talk." And it's just sort of like, whatever attraction we're in front of, I have stories about because I've been talking to Imagineers for 30 years. So yeah, I mean, it's weird. Maybe if I'd stayed at Mouse Planet, that door wouldn't have opened. So I guess you have to leave yourself open for sometimes things that you want don't happen, but for the right reason.
Yeah, I would agree. Would you say that downtime after Mouse Planet, you just keep writing regardless?
You had to. It just comes down to the only way in a situation like that where, you suddenly lose your forum, you lose the place where people know you at. It's just like, and in fact, that was what was kind of funny was that people looked for me. They liked what I wrote, and well, where the hell did he go now? And just in fact, when I went from Mouse Planet to Laughing Place to DC Central, and to watch how the people who would comment on the stories would, hey, I found you again, and it's sort of like, thank you, Google. But yeah, you just have to persevere in a situation like that where you get knocked down. It's just sort of like the classic definition of success. You get, knocked down 2 times and you get up 3. It's something like that. You just, okay, all right, didn't work out, back to work.
So could you share a favorite memory?
I've been very lucky. I've gotten to do some really, 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 really cool things, and they keep happening. I mean, just within the past month, Nancy and I were at the New Amsterdam Theater, and Michael Korzarin, the gentleman who orchestrates all of the music for, if it's a Disney stage show or a Disney animated musical, Michael's had a hand in it. All right. And I was interviewing him, and he's like, "Oh, well, hang on, let's go downstairs." And he actually took us into the basement of the New Amsterdam. We were down in the orchestra pit. What was really cool was that, that's neither Nancy and I had ever been in this place or a big professional New York Broadway theater. It was one of these things where I turned to Nancy and said, well, you got to do it. So she actually climbed up to where the conductor stood and got to look out into the world and see the view that a conductor gets at a Broadway show. And it's like, and she said, oh, you got to do this. Like, no, that's yours. I think half the fun of this job is getting to share and doing something like that. Nancy, who studied music a lot of her life, to be in that sort of position was cool and special for her. Conversely, I was just down at Disney. I was down earlier this year for the opening of Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. And again, Nancy, because she wants me to be a less fat man, has me going to water aerobics 3 times a week. And again, when you're the guy in water aerobics, you're at the back of the class. You're the one drowning in the deep end because you don't want to frighten the women. And it turns out there was this high school kid who was next to me, and his mother had brought him along. His name was Joe. He played in the Nashua marching band, and he mentioned that he was going to be down at Disney. It turns out the date he mentioned that his high school was going down and marching through the Magic Kingdom was the day that they were going to have the party for the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, the press party. And I was like, wow, well, if you're down there, let me see if I can get you on the attraction. And as it turns out, we go into the party, and it's like Fort Knox. The security is ridiculous. And meanwhile, Joe is giving me a call. He's in the park. He's with his family. And it's like, geez, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make this happen. And I feel bad because I promised this kid that I would try to get him into this ride. Meanwhile, we've gotten on it because of the press thing 4, 5, 6 times at this point. It's a great ride. We're really enjoying it. But I still feel bad that I promised Joe that I would try to get him on this. And that doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so meanwhile, the word sweeps through the party that Grumpy Cat is there. And Nancy, who loves cats, just like suddenly, Grumpy Cat is here. And so, we're there with Shelley Karen, the woman behind her. Excellent website, by the way. Quick plug on the Go and MCO. But Nancy just basically, you go to the back. And Shelley, you go to the front. We're going to find this cat. And so everybody takes off in different directions. So I'm walking to the back of the party, and they've blocked off basically the perimeter of Seven Dwarf Mine Trains with these sort of mobile hedge things that Disney has. But as I get to the back, I noticed that the old mercantile shop from Mickey's Toontown Fair that's now, I guess it's called Big Top Mercantile now because it's in the Dumbo Circus area. But there's this hole in the hedge. And there's a Plaid, one of the people from guest relations, standing in the hall. And I walk up to her and it's like, that's where the restrooms are, isn't it? She's, yes, sir. Says, can I go back there? Absolutely. And they're like, I found the hole in the perimeter. So I got back, I used the restroom, and I called Joe and I said, get your ass back here to Big Top Mercantile. And so 5 minutes later, he and his mom and his dad and the cousins show up. And I go, I'm sorry, I can only get one person in, or I think I can get one person in. And I now turn to the Plaid and I just explained the situation that Joe has come all the way from New Hampshire and he marched in your park today and he entertained all these people. And, can't we make an exception? Well, can't we get this kid in here? And the Plaid, what I love about her is she stepped out of the doorway and she deliberately sort of turns her back to me. And it's like, I never noticed that architectural detail over there before. And I grab Joe, we run through the entrance or the exit, and I get him on the ride. And seriously, the second the ride is over, we pull back into the station. There's an announcement the party is over. So we got him in at the last possible moment. But he's hooting, he's screaming, he's having a great time. More to the point, he has bragging rights over the other 250 members of his high school band because he got on the ride and they didn't. And that to me is, in the last 6 or 8 months, that's one of my top Disney related memories, because it's like, again, I was able to do something nice to somebody who lives outside the chocolate shop, who loves chocolate, and got this extra special taste of it ahead of everybody else. I'd been on it a couple times that night and I was beginning to think it's a good ride. But riding with Joe, it's like, oh, it's a great ride. They really did a nice job. And as a civilian, he confirmed that. I guess that comes from being in a large family, just the whole notion of you're taught to share your toys. And so, for example, when the Big Hero 6 box showed up today, it was just sort of like, okay, so, my daughter is coming out to spend 3 weeks with us this summer, and she called today to check in and said, okay, the Big Hero 6 box showed up. So, Nancy's getting the T-shirt, I get the action figure, you get the hat. And it's like, cool, I'm done. So again, share your toys. I guess that's the lesson.
With all the great memories that you've shared so far today, has there been any real disappointments with your dream along the way? I mean, I know being kicked off of a Mouse Planet was, but outside of that.
No, the weird thing is, I think I've never been one of these guys who nurses. I can hold a grudge the same way I can hold my breath. It's just one of those things. You can get mad, you can get angry, you can get disappointed. But it's like, if you dwell on it, it's like, how much time, how much energy are you willing to put into preserving a bad memory? Just to keep it close, to keep it tight. They always talk about how what's kind about memory is over time, the corners get shaved off, the sharp edges fade away. I think, have there been disappointments? Have there been hurts? I'm the first divorce in my family. I'm not particularly proud of that. But I worked hard at becoming my ex-wife's friend. I worked hard at becoming a good long-distance daddy. And that's, I think that one of the things I'm proudest of now is that I have this great relationship with my daughter, who's out in California with my ex. And I'm in the spot I wanted to be in. You sometimes see kids of divorce who with their dads get overly excited. And, there's a lot of pressure to deliver, to build strong memories, because they don't see one another enough. In my case with my daughter, it's the exact opposite. I am the taken for granted dad. I wanted so badly to be the sort of the parental equivalent of, like every other parent on the planet. I wanted to be the dad. We talk every night on Skype and, cell phone or whatever. And it's just sort of like, dad. Yeah, dad. All right. And no big deal that, oh, dad is coming to town. That is actually one of the sweeter parts of this gig, that I do get to go to California as often as I do and get to hang with Alice, or get to take her to, when she grows up, she wants to be a sequential artist. In fact, she's at Long Beach Community College right now, building her portfolio to eventually go after a degree at Cal Arts. Though the interesting thing is she just went and covered a panel for our website at the LA Film Festival. And here's Alex Hirsch, the gentleman who produced Gravity Falls for Disney Channel, which is this great series. If you haven't seen it, you really got to do. But he was up there talking about how he went to Cal Arts. And he said, what was great about Cal Arts is they made us make one movie a year, but it's also crazy expensive. And wouldn't it make more sense in the long run if you were a filmmaker just to make your movies, put them up on YouTube or iTunes or whatever, get the world's attention and break through there, whereas opposed to putting yourself and your family in debt, to go to CalArts. And it was just kind of both. I didn't know whether to punch him or shake his hands when I heard that news, because it's like, I don't know if that's the lesson I want my daughter hearing, but at the same time, I kind of like that my daughter heard that. So I don't believe it's healthy to obsess on disappointment. I mean, it's good to learn the lessons. If you did something stupid, to remember that, but at the same time, not to obsess on failure or obsess on mistakes or things that might have been. It's just sort of, I think it's more positive to just march forward, to just learn from your mistakes and apply them to future projects and be done with it.
It's funny that you mentioned that about film. I was just talking to my cousin who went to school for film direction, and I was like, in this day and age, if you can't make something entertaining for about $100 or less, it's probably not a good idea for you to seek out professional major debt education on that.
Oh, no, I totally agree. And it just, but you feel bad because that's what we've been taught. You want that piece of sheepskin hanging on the wall to validate things where, the weird thing is, at least when you work in film and animation, your degree and your student film will get you your first job, but only your first job. It's everything you do after that point that makes your career. And yes, for the longest time, for the last 10 or 15 years, there were a lot of people that's like, ooh, everyone at Pixar went to CalArts, so I want to go there. But I worry that there's a generation of kids who think that's a straight pipe into Pixar, and it really isn't. What's a straight pipe into Pixar or Disney or DreamWorks or Blue Sky is a really good student film and a demonstration of a really good work ethic. And beyond that, it's all a crapshoot.
What would you say your dreams for the future look like?
I'm really happy with where I am right now. I mean, I live with a lovely young woman. Well, she's my age. What am I talking about? I'm 55. I'm sorry. We grade on a curve here, folks. I plan on living to be 110. And we have 2 annoying cats. I get to do fun stuff. I get to drive down to New York or go out to LA or Orlando. I'm working on a book. I get to see my daughter, regularly. My parents are in relatively good health. My dreams for the future is I'd like this to continue. I'd like to meet more people who have fun stories to share. I'd like to help promote their films or their projects or whatever. I'd like to keep holding open doors for people who are getting their careers started or offering advice. I guess that the funnest part about my job is that I get to wake up at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I can be professionally ignorant. This is my job. Someone will ask me something. Hey, have you heard about this? It's like, no, I haven't. But I can get on the phone or I can get on the internet and I can research it and I can pull together info and I can build a story. And by the end of the day, I've actually learned something and hopefully I'm sharing something with my audience. And then I get to do it again tomorrow. I mean, I think, that's the nice thing. Something new is always coming through the door for me. And I know there's a lot of people, again, I come from a family of teachers and there's a certain repetitive nature to that. Because again, you're teaching, the teaching first graders who become second graders, who become third graders. And I have great respect for those folks who can keep it fresh and can keep something that they've done over and over and over again and make it new and unique and wonderful for people coming through the door. But I have the luxury of just real new comes through the door every day. Just again, like the Big Hero 6 box.
So is there any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Again, it's kind of flattering again when the invitation came to the door to come do this show. But the very nature of, the title of the show, dreams. I mean, I know people have a lot of dreams that, that they want to come true, that they want for their lives. In my own case, everything I ever achieved happened for 2 reasons. All right. Either somebody was very, very kind to me, and I'm not just talking about Disney legends. I'm talking about Nancy, the woman in my life. When we met was right after I was divorced from Michelle. I was a miserable wreck. My kid was 6,000 miles away in Hawaii. I was a reclamation project. She looked at a swamp and thought, yeah, I could do something with that. So, again, every good thing that's happened in my life for the past 15, 20 years flows from Nancy. Also flows from my parents who, again, when I was at my lowest and my worst, gave me, again, it's the, what is it? The Thomas Wolfe line is, the effect of, home is where they have to take you in. When I was divorced and my life was crashing down around my head, they threw open the door again and allowed me to come home. So I try to remember that. I try to remember that when I needed people to be kind and generous, they were. And, it's just sometimes in today's world when we are so cynical or we're on deadline or, that sort of thing, it's so easy to say no. And what I would just suggest is if just try to remember where you are in your life, where you are in your careers, because somebody saw the sweaty person on the other side of the desk with the bad resume and took the chance. Okay. So just try to remember that. It just seems in this internet age where it's Facebooking or Twittering and trying to figure out, 140 characters, how we can be mean to one another. Just be nicer. Okay. So that's it. There's me. This is as profound as I get, folks. All right.
I think that's a great message, Jim. You want to plug all your websites?
Oh, God. Okay. What have I got going on here? Okay. We got Jim Hill Media. We got the Huffington Post, where I'm supposed to be writing 2 stories a week, at least. I do my podcast with, Len, the unofficial guide, Disney Dish. And we're doing our first ever live show. Actually at Flushing Meadows in a couple of weeks, August 16th. We're going out there. It's myself, Len Testa, and Mike Newell is joining us for the show, and we're doing sort of a tribute to the 50th anniversary of the New York World's Fair, but we're actually recording it with an audience and then putting that up as a podcast. And we're kind of hoping that if that works, we can then use this as an excuse to go to all these places that I've always wanted to do shows from, like go to Virginia and do one about Disney's America, or go to Long Beach and talk about Port Disney. And, so would be really great if this were a success. So if you people want to come, that'd be cool. And of course, I'm here with Joe on his show. And thank you for inviting me. This was really nice of you to let me talk for way too long. You are going to edit this, right? Like with a hacksaw and a chisel and get it down to 3 or 4 hours. Is that the plan now?
Well, there is some editing, but it'll probably still be about an hour and a half.
I apologize to all you people. Okay. Just, you got things to do, right? Laundry, cooking, just make the bed. I owe you all an hour and a half of your lives. I'm really sorry.
No, the pleasure was all mine. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and even over the time to come on. The stories are great and the messages were wonderful. I think that a lot of people are going to resonate with it, and I hope a lot of people check out your website and your work. And I would love to be there on August 16th. Fortunately, but unfortunately, I'll be on the West Coast.
Oh, well, enjoy the West Coast. Where are you going?
We're going to Vegas and then to California for LA and Disney. My first time in Disneyland, as well as my wife's first time in Disneyland.
Very cool. Wow. Well, enjoy. I mean, I'll be intrigued to hear your thoughts. I've always felt that Disney World is a little too big, where Disneyland, it's the right scale. There's something about it's so charming. That coupled with Vegas. Have you done Vegas before?
No, it's my first time there too.
Ooh, scary town. Okay. Again, we'll love to hear stories from your experience there. I was just out there for the licensing show, and man, that town, I feel like they just, like, if we could just pick up your ankles and shake you for a while till your money fell out, we'd leave you alone. Just amazing town. But anyway, thank you again. This was a treat to do the show. And again, please edit it. I mean, I swear to God, get a hacksaw out to try to get it down to at least 5 hours. All right. Just, okay. So
I will try my best. I promise.
All right. Thank you again, Joe.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Dreamers Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @Dreamers Podcast. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Dreamers Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Dreamers podcast, please send an email to j@jpar.co. This podcast is copyright 2014 by jpar.co.